is censorship cartel and is affront to Americans' constitutional freedoms and must be completely dismantled. And he adds that Americans must be able to reclaim their right to free speech. Indeed, our democracy depends on freedom of expression. Now, on this, it's important to note that the head of the FCC, he does not need to be approved by Congress. Carr has already previously been confirmed to the Senate, right? So Carr is already now in this position by appointment. Now, look, on another point, the use of the term cartel is actually probably important. I would say it's important. Because if we go by the Merriam-Webster dictionary, a cartel on the business side, because they have a political definition as well, and he's referring to the business side, a cartel is defined as, quote, a combination of independent commercial or industrial enterprises designed to limit competition or fix prices. Now, what does it mean if you want to limit competition and fix prices? Why is that important? Well, the reason that's legally important, the language he's using here, at least in my take, is that could be illegal. This could refer to illegal business practices, and in particular, this could be a violation of antitrust laws. The whole network of companies, groups, and individuals could be implicated for their collective involvement. Because, look, it's illegal for companies to create monopolies through conspiracies. This ties into the Sherman Antitrust Act. And here's what the Department of Justice says on this. They say the Sherman Act also makes it illegal to monopolize, conspire to monopolize, or attempt to monopolize a market for products or services. An unlawful monopoly exists when one firm has market power for a product or service, and it has obtained or maintained that market power not through competition on the merits, but because the firm has suppressed competition by engaging in anti-competitive conduct. Monopolization offenses may be prosecuted criminally or civilly. Now, look, of course, it could be suggested that corporate media entities in particular have been maintaining a monopoly on a product or service, not through competition on the merits, because they're just competing on the marketplace, but because these companies have suppressed competition by engaging in anti-competitive conduct. Now, look, we'll see if any violations ever get officially named, but I think this actually could be important, just going by the language of it in my interpretation. It's also possible we could see other violations on this. It might not be limited to this. Trump himself has actually listed several possible charges to go after what he also calls the censorship cartel. Now, Carr has already initiated investigations into these big tech companies and their involvement with what he describes as the censorship cartel. And he's asking about their involvement as well with NewsGuard, which rates news and other information websites. I'll be talking more about this after we come back from a quick break. President-elect Donald Trump is now named the new head of the Federal Communications Commission. That's going to be Brendan Carr. Now, Carr has openly stated plans to dismantle tech's so-called censorship cartel. And Carr has already initiated investigations into some of these companies and their involvement with what he describes as a cartel. And he's asking about their involvement, notably with NewsGuard, which rates news and information websites. Here's what Carr states in his letter to the heads of these companies, these big tech companies. He says, "For now, I'm writing to obtain information from you that can inform the FCC's work to promote free speech and diversity of viewpoints. As you know, big tech's prized liability shield, Section 230, is codified in the Communications Act, which the FCC administers." He's going to be overseeing this, in other words. And he says, as relevant here, Section 230 only confers benefits on big tech companies when they operate, in the words of the statute, in good faith. And he said, it is in this context that I'm writing to obtain information about your work with one specific organization, the Orwellian name NewsGuard, as exposed by the Twitter files, which again was the files after Elon Musk bought Twitter. They found all these communications where Twitter employees had been communicating with various organizations and government entities on how to censor people. They had, basically whole lists of people who they regarded as the spreaders of misinformation and disinformation, and even suppressed what turned out to be a lot of true information, right? That was the Twitter files. And he says this: as exposed by the Twitter files, NewsGuard bills itself as the internet's arbiter of truth, and as its co-founder put it, vaccine against misinformation. And he notes that NewsGuard purports to rate the credibility of news and information outlets and tells readers and advertisers which outlets they can trust. As the U.S. Committee on Small Business 2024 staff report stated, quote, these things combined with NewsGuard's vast partnership in the advertising space select winners and losers in the news media space. And he notes that NewsGuard does so by leveraging its partnerships with advertising agencies to effectively censor targeted news outlets. In other words, putting news outlets out of business if they don't play the game. That's the allegation, it seems. Now, Carr goes further on this, noting as well how this organization that rates news sites and again has these relations with all these different companies and also has relations with the advertising side, right? That the allegation is they can, again, pick the winners and losers. Now, he notes that it allegedly does this to the extent that it can actually impact their advertising, then also with ties to these big tech companies, manage to censor them in other ways. Now, his note about Section 230 is also important, though. Now, this is Section 230 of the Communications Act. In this regard, that's important because what he's suggesting is that their legal protections, these big tech companies, their legal protections under Section 230 could be revoked depending on their involvement with this network. And he goes on to explain how some of their other products also tie in with this network, including with their web browsers. Because, again, he's naming these he's writing this directly to the heads of these major companies. A lot of them have major web browsers, and they also have ties to some of the biggest social media platforms, and also with artificial intelligence, which is now feeding into the search results on various search engines, and also creating the basis of a lot of research that's being done online. Meaning that if you centralize that, and if you cut out certain voices, you can essentially maintain a singular worldview and cut out everybody else, right? That's the allegation here. Now, Carr states that these big tech companies, in other words, in his exact words, in other words, your products may use NewsGuard, or you may enable your customers to use NewsGuard. And then comes an interesting allegation, right, in terms of this, where he suggests that this may be a violation of Section 230. And what does that mean? Well, look, this could cause these big tech companies to lose their legal protection, meaning they could be sued by users, meaning they could possibly face other types of charges, and face charges and lawsuits in ways that they've been protected from up until now. This is the open letter again. He says, but NewsGuard's own track record raises questions about whether relying on the organization's products would constitute good faith actions within the meaning of Section 230. Now remember, he noted that the legal implication of Section 230 only holds if the companies do this in good faith. And if they violate the good faith element, then they could lose the legal protections. And he's suggesting that their relationship with this company could actually make them lose it on the grounds that they lack good faith. That's what he's suggesting here. Now, Carr explains some of the other topics that NewsGuard has checked and penalized, right? Including if websites report on the COVID-19 lab leak theory and other topics. And again, they were engaged in censoring a lot of information that is debatable at the very least, and sometimes actually turned out to be true in the long run. Now, he notes the organization is an ongoing subject of investigation by the U.S. House Committee on Oversight and Accountability for potential impacts on free speech. So the FCC's involvement of this is one kind of cog in a machine looking into what they're defining as a censorship cartel. And then Carr goes on to ask these big tech companies for information, interestingly, relating to any type of involvement with NewsGuard, including on the service side, the customer side, and the advertising side, because he's again alleging that they have ties in with all these big advertising companies. And he also asked for information on any third-party advertising or marketing agencies they're working with. Now look, my take, this is potentially going to be very big, because again, right, this could tie to antitrust violations, civil, and even, again, direct lawsuits, right? This could be really serious. People could go to jail for this, potentially, in terms of how he's defining it. It could also lead these big tech companies to lose their legal protections under Section 230 and then be able to be sued by users. It also seems this agenda could be on the plate for the incoming Trump administration as well, because, again, they're talking about that. One of the key issues around Carr, Brendan Carr, right? He actually wrote the FCC chapter on policy recommendations in the Project 2025 report that news that's been going on about, right? This is chapter 28 of that report, and here's what he wrote in it for the FCC. This is Project 2025, the actual document. Policy priorities for the FCC. It says the FCC needs to change course and bring new urgency to achieving four main goals: reining in big tech, promoting national security, unleashing economic prosperity, and ensuring FCC accountability and good governance. Now, in that report, he actually recommends eliminating the immunities that courts added to Section 230, which he describes are actually very broad and very vague. Basically, these big tech companies, because of the broad and vague definitions of legal immunities they get, they're immune to a lot of legal oversight, basically. They're not really able to be held accountable on many fronts, he's arguing. And notably, he also calls to improve transparency rules on big tech, including on how they can ban people, how they restrict people, how they shadow ban people, how they downrank people or websites or news agencies, because they're doing this in ways that don't really have transparency. And he's again suggesting these could be possible violations of the law, maybe. But again, we'll have to see. Now, he also talks about going after TikTok, rooting out the role of China Telecom within some U.S. companies. This is interesting because, for Trump, he seems to not really be on board with banning TikTok. The new FCC appointee, Brendan Carr, who's now in, he is talking about banning it. At least he was in the Project 2025 report. It's not clear if he's going to maintain that position now that he's in. But it does seem the big goal, though, is to break the monopolies that have been taking over the internet and the information space. The issue that a lot of us have seen is that competition is very difficult on the internet. If you want to start a new company, if you want to start a blog or a news media, it's actually very hard to compete because private companies have become the gatekeepers. And these gatekeepers, they collude with each other in a lot of ways. If you don't play by their rules, if you don't repeat their narratives, if you violate it by saying something controversial, you get canceled, you get deplatformed, you get demonetized, and your entire business plan is now gone. They can destroy you, right? And so this is one of the big issues. They can cause you a lot of harm. We watched what happened with a lot of online influencers and independent media starting from around 2016. Remember what happened in 2016. When Donald Trump won the election the first time, a lot of news outlets stepped back and said, what did we do wrong? Because Hillary Clinton was, by a large margin, projected to be the winner in 2016. When she did not win, a lot of news outlets questioned, well, what did we get wrong? Was our polling wrong? Do we not understand readers? What did we do? Now, they began doing a little bit of soul searching, and that lasted a very short while. Then they flipped and said, the reason we got it wrong, the reason people voted the way they did, was not because of wrongdoing on our part. It's because they've been radicalized by online influencers, which they then called, the alt-right, and they came up with all these names for them, and conspiracy theorists and everything else. Then they started eliminating these groups from the internet. They started demonetizing, deplatforming online influencers. They started canceling people on their YouTube channels. They went after the advertising, and, many of them even got demonetized on these platforms like YouTube and such. They went after entire media companies. And what they did is used these systems, hit pieces and news outlets, to go after the advertisers, colluding in some ways on these disinformation and fact-checking platforms, and they destroyed their competition. How many of you used to watch somebody on YouTube or Twitter or Facebook or wherever else back in like 2015, 2016, who is now no longer there? How many of you know somebody like that, who you used to watch and got kicked off the internet basically because they said the wrong thing? There's a lot of them. Even the average users experience this, for example, when they had online forums, Reddit, Facebook, and so on. A lot of people used to have communities, and even these communities got shut down in many regards. And then we watched something else. We watched the rise of so-called fact checkers. A lot of news outlets began fact-checking initiatives. Third-party fact-checking initiatives started up. And we've been seeing a global system now emerging that is actively trying to control free speech. Now, like in America, of course, we have the First Amendment. The Constitution protects our rights to free speech. But because of this alleged, censorship cartel, a network of private businesses, organizations, news outlets in some instances, NGOs, and sometimes even foreign governments where they don't have the Constitution protecting free speech, they've been colluding with each other to get around the constitutional rights of Americans. It's not being done through the government. If the government did it, it would be a violation of the Constitution here. But private businesses working in collaboration with each other have been carrying this out. Now, this has always been legally questionable. This has been, again, one of the big arguments, which is basically, can government censor you indirectly? Can they censor you through roundabout means? If instead of censoring you directly, they merely inform a platform like Twitter or X now or something like that, like we saw with the Twitter files, which is, again, what was revealed in both the Facebook files and the Twitter files. Can a government agency have an open communication line or a government official to individuals at these platforms and then inform them of issues with certain users and certain speech and certain narratives and so on, not telling them to censor technically, but opening up this channel in such a way that it suggests these individuals should be censored and then eventually does lead to these narratives, even individual posts, and sometimes even whole individuals being censored on the internet. That has always been a legal question. We could soon get the answers on that. And even bigger than this, if it turns out that these organizations have been working in conjunction with each other, you could again see possible antitrust law violations and possibly, I would say, even racketeering violations if they're working in a conspiracy amongst each other to carry this out. But again, you'd have to see communications demonstrating that they were working in collaboration with the goal to violate a law. In this case, possible antitrust laws or something else. And also the big important question on this going forward is going to be just how extensive was this system? Just how big is it? Maybe it's a conspiracy. Maybe it's all in our imaginations, right? Maybe these organizations have been legitimately going after bad actors. That's a total possibility. But we're going to get answers on it. We're going to find out who was involved, how it was operated, and whether these actions do or do not violate the law. That is the nature of the investigations that have now begun. And interestingly as well, this could spell some bad news for the big corporate media. If censorship goes away, if platforms like search engines and social media websites stop giving preferential treatment to the media, if advertisers cannot be stopped or pressured or attacked in ways that prevent them from placing ads with the competitors of the big corporate media, which happens right now, by the way, then what does this mean? Well, look, what this will mean is that all these big news outlets, the entire corporate media landscape, they will lose the preferential treatment they've been enjoying. And that also means something. All those big news outlets will be forced to compete on the same playing field as everybody else. They've been playing a rigged game. They've been playing a game where they get one set of rules and everybody else has another set of rules. They get, again, the search engine results. They get preferential treatment on social media in many instances. They get the advertisers. Their competitors are denied those things, and they're still surviving somehow, right? Now, interestingly, Imagine what that would look like if those preferential treatments they're getting were just swept out from under them and they were on the same level playing field. Well, everyone, that's all for tonight. Thank you for joining us. And as always, please take care of yourselves, stay informed, and stay free.